All right, we are back here with Anup from ThreatMate, and this is part two. We had so much to talk about. We're like, can we make it through all of our topics? And of course, the one bullet point here I really want to talk about is compliance as a service. But first, Anup, tell us a little bit about ThreatMate and what brings you to us.
Yeah, so thanks again for having me on part two, Adam. ThreatMate is a continuous threat exposure management platform. And as we were discussing in the part one, we can find exposures, security exposures, other vulnerabilities that adversaries find and exploit. And the whole idea behind using the ThreatMate platform is to be proactive for your clients. Find these before the adversaries do so that you can fix them before the adversaries get onto your client networks, which is what people typically, once they're on your network, that's right of boom. And we're kind of glad to get in this conversation at some point. Left of boom is all the stuff that you as a managed service provider can do to secure that network.
Yeah.
And where ThreatMate helps is we find those exposures that are being actively exploited by adversaries. Don't waste your time on the others that are not material to security.
Yeah. Attack surface is something we talk about all the time in security. And it's hard to know, especially I'm going to put it out there. It's hard to know attack surface when you're not internal IT. People can comment below if they want to. But I'm going to tell you, like, as an external auditor, I don't know your business as well as you do. The people who run in there every day. There are little nooks and crannies and creases all over your business organization that an internal IT person gets to know, and even they have a hard time finding them.
That's right.
So knowing that like this like level 3 vulnerability that doesn't look like much has a huge exposure because of the way it's being handled by internal business processes. And so you can take something as small, that's really tiny, and that attack surface becomes massive because it's overexposed. And it's really complicated to find that without an intensive pen testing process or a really great service that's looking for those and then mapping them to, hey, if somebody were to exploit this little tiny one, they would now have access to all your PII.
Right.
And so that's going to be a big newspaper headline for those of you who don't want to be in the news, especially public entities.
Yeah. And there's some nuance to what you're saying. A lot of people think of attacks as, hey, there's this vulnerability and, exploit it and boom. Oftentimes attacks are multi-staged, right? So the RDP service you're offering to the internet, which you should not be, is a security exposure, right? So that can be exploited to gain access onto a network. From there, the adversary is now scanning your network. What's it scanning for? It's scanning for targets, things like your AD server, right? Where it can then gain more privileged access to other devices on the network till ultimately gets to its objective. What's its objective? Yep. It can be anything from, stealing customer data to encrypting every box and extorting you for ransom, right? So there's all kinds of different things, but oftentimes, it's multi-stage and a single exposure can be just the stepping stone that an adversary needs to get to that next level.
So one of the things you talked about, we were discussing what topics that are important to you. And one of the things you said was there's marketing hype surrounding MDR, that we're losing sight of all security services left of boom.
Yeah.
MSP are the right folks to secure networks and proactively prevent compromise. Dive into that for me a little bit. What do you mean the marketing hype around MDR?
Well, look, I think we all have seen great companies scale right of boom. So if you look at Huntress, Blackpoint Cyber, I don't want to say CrowdStrike because it's unfashionable at the moment, but these are companies that
CrowdStrike. I'm putting myself out there saying,
okay, these are companies that are there to find adversaries that are on the network, right? Yeah. And then respond and sometimes recover, right? That's all right at boom. And by the way, it's very expensive, right? And so left the boom is all the work that goes into uh, establishing a network, making it secure, and maintaining that network security, right?
Yeah.
And it's like it's like your wooden deck. Maybe this is a terrible metaphor, but if you don't maintain it, that thing will rot over time, right?
Yep.
And the same is true for IT. If you don't maintain, we all know this. I'm speaking to the choir here. But if you don't maintain that IT, we know that you're going to have problems. And from a security point of view, you're going to have massive problems. So that's what I mean by the right party, right? The
Okay.
right party are the managed service providers who are responsible for securing the network. And I think part of the hype around MDR, in that hype, we've lost sight of the core job that managed service providers do that is a cybersecurity service. And in fact, can be a very high margin cybersecurity service. So I think managed service providers are selling themselves short when it comes to cybersecurity, because you have a critical cybersecurity job and you should A, be doing it, B, being given credit for it, and C, getting paid for it.
Yep. And you got to think about those blue team activities, right? That's that left of boom. What
Yep.
was the preventative measures you took
Right.
to? You're eventually going to have as we all know, you're eventually going to have a security incident of
Wait,
some
yeah,
kind.
I think we should define, because you
Okay.
and I are steeped in cybersecurity, but not everyone is. So people might be familiar with the red team. Red team are the guys you hire to poke holes and get onto your network. They're that pen test group that is there to show you where the holes are. We should circle back around to automated pen testing later. Blue team are the defenders. So in a capture the flag competition, which many of you have heard of, you've got the red team versus the blue team. The blue team's job is what? It's to secure that network as best as they can, right?
Yep.
That's what you're talking about. So it's actively defending the network, left of boom, to prevent boom. So I just wanted to be clear when you say blue team, what you're talking about. So that,
Yeah.
no.
Prevention. And I have a weird philosophy in IT. At least I started. It's now known as zero trust. There's lots of different names for it, but like assume compromise as a blue team. Assume you're wrong. Assume that you need to secure your network more. That there's something like that the person next to you is a malicious actor. Or that the code coming in has malicious code in it. Somehow it made it around all your protections.
Right.
And as a blue team member, how do you handle that? How do you look at that so you can say, okay, here is the thing I should be focusing on this week. This is where I'm going to get the best bang for my buck for securing the network. It could take me 6 years like to fix one other issue, but I could do this one in the next 5 minutes.
Exactly.
And you as a blue team that's your job. You've got to figure that out. And then you can once you get yourself really set well, and you feel super confident in what you're doing, go find yourself a red team.
Right.
and have them show you why your ego is unwarranted.
Right. Well, you touched on a number of topics there that are worth diving into. So traditional, I'll call legacy vulnerability management, started with a false assumption, which was that you have infinite time and resources to patch everything. So, more recently, the field has matured to a point where they now use fixed capacity models, right? Which mean, and by the way, we live in a fixed capacity model world. So how much time are you going to give to a particular client network? Well, you can quantify that, right? Because, uh, the more time you spend fixing problems, the less profitability you give that client with a fixed cost contract, right? We're all,
Okay.
shooting for fixed cost contracts for recurring revenue. So in a certain sense, you don't have infinite capacity. So in a limited capacity model, the real question becomes, given my limited capacity, which might be an hour a week, it might be more, whatever it is, right? What do I do in that hour or that 2 hours a week for this client? And that's where ThreatMate comes in and says, look, we've done the math for you, right? we've already looked at all these exposures and we've correlated with the threat intelligence to say, guess what? You can ignore all of these for now until they pop up as being exploitable and just focus on the highest risk threats, which was your question. What do I do, today? Well, I'll tell you exactly what to do today and how much it's worth.
Yeah. And that's the value into the blue team. Sometimes we wait until there's a pen test and wait until somebody has a finding. But if you in the corporate world, when we're appropriately using vulnerability scanners, they're feeding and directing my attention. I have so much to do. I can't do it all the time. But what I can do is I can go scan down my list of vulnerabilities here and saying, oh, that's an easy fix. That's an easy fix. Oh, that's going to require a change window. I need downtime to do that one. I need to buy something to do that one. But I know these 6 ones as a blue team member. I love blue team. That's my home, right? I love preventative measures, and I cannot be effective as a blue team member without a great vulnerability scanner or a great something giving me insights as to where to focus my attentions. Yes, I could just harden this OS because it needs to be hardened. Yes, I could put another firewall in place. Yes, I could segment my network, but why? Am I just doing this because of compliance, or am I doing this because there's something that showed me this is a vulnerability. This is an issue on my network. So I had a pen test done, oh my gosh, it's probably been 15 years now ago. And it was a great pen test because I was that ego, my network is completely secure, like down to how I was doing NTLM, like everything was secure. And they came in and a pen tester sat there for a week, and he and I kind of chatted, but he was on our network. He was doing all sorts of fun things. It was an inside job.
Yeah.
And at the end, he goes, you got a pretty good network, but you forgot to password protect your core switch. So I win.
Oops. And that illustrates the difference between the blue team and the red team. You kind of mentioned it earlier, which is the blue team, in a certain sense, has to take care of everything in order to be secure. The red team only has to find one vulnerability. So that's asymmetric, right? And that became, the reason why people kind of, said, boy, this is too much. And for us became the opportunity to say, no, we can help parse everything you do into the stuff that's driving real risk so that you focus only on those things to mitigate your risk in a cost efficient way.
Yeah. And I want to talk about coupling this, right? So you've got this, should I call you a vulnerability scanner, or what should I refer to you as?
Well, we call ourselves a platform. So on our platform, we have a vulnerability scanner, but we do provide continuous threat exposure management.
Okay.
So looking at every attack surface. Right?
Okay.
And we're looking for different exposures on those different attack surfaces.
Okay. So you've got this item that is showing you where the threats are, where to mitigate, and what's going on. Now, there's a second part of this, which is why we called this, we've only got about 10 minutes left here, compliance is a service. So compliance is trying to give you direction. So you're an IT person who does not know security, right? You are not GPEN certified. You're not CISSP. You haven't gone through rigorous training at SANS or any of the institutions on what does security analysis mean. Okay. You're a smart individual. You're very good at your job. You are very intelligent. You just ain't got time to do everything. You're a limited resource, a finite resource. So you have this thing that's telling you all these things wrong with your network, where you need to go. Now you have a compliance family, a framework here going, you are in the financial industry. Here are the top things we recommend you focus on.
Right.
And watch your compliance as a service. So I just integrated with Tim Golden, a compliance scorecard. If you guys don't know him, fantastic compliance as a service tool. Take that and the findings there, and then the vulnerabilities, and then see oh my gosh, we need to do this and this. And now you've got your easy answers. You don't need to know all the huge security in depth. You'll need to be really well versed in man in the middle attacks, but you do know that the compliance framework is saying you need to look for these things. And then the threat management service is saying, hey, these threats are out there. Do
Right.
you care about these assets? Here's the easy fix for it. The compliance manager says, you need to be looking for these and reviewing these.
Yeah.
Whether it's CIS, whether it's PCI, they have the things they want you to focus on. That's going to help give you direction. So what do you think about that? How does compliance as a service play into what you're doing?
It makes a ton of sense, and it makes a ton of business sense, and that's why my statement is it will be ultimately where most MSPs go and end up. I think many already aspire to get there, because if think about it from your client's shoes, right? You your job as a business leader is to drive revenue selling products or services. And yes, there are costs and expenses, but you're not going to want to spend more on a costly service like cybersecurity than you have to, because the more you spend, the less profitability you have. So I think we can all be sensitive to that benefit, right?
Then cybersecurity becomes an attack on your revenue.
That's right. It becomes an attack on your revenue, right? So what compliance does is it level sets for both the client and the security service provider what needs to be done, right? And it started in regulatory environments, right? So you mentioned healthcare, I believe, like HIPAA, retail payment cards like PCI, and then there's the critical infrastructures and financial being one. They've got their own compliance requirements. What we're seeing is, and that was put there by the government largely, right? And then self-regulated. But what we're seeing is people understanding that, hey, I do need a framework on which to understand what to do. So when I outsource cybersecurity or when I outsource IT, I want to make sure that they're doing, what's an acceptable practice within the space. And your example is a good one. So CIS, right? CIS tells you the correct configuration or secure configuration for your endpoints. It could be Windows laptops. It could be Linux servers, whatever it might be. There is a correct and secure configuration for those devices, and CIS sets a benchmark for that, right?
Yes.
So going back to vulnerabilities, every single compliance regime you'll find today related to IT requires vulnerability discovery and management, right? And so they're intimately linked, right? And so where ThreatMate comes into this is we say, look, we can give you all the information you would need from every asset. So there's asset, there's process typically when it comes to compliance. And what we do is we gather all the evidentiary data needed to say these devices are within compliance for this regulatory framework or not, right? And so I think from a managed service provider point of view, you should be thinking about how can I provide some level of compliance. And we suggest starting with NIST cybersecurity framework because it's a very good, broad compliance framework that you can say, hey, these are the 5 categories that I need to make sure I have a capability in, from identity to protection, detection, response, recovery. And by the way, if you have a client that doesn't have a control in each of those categories, you can say you don't have, for example, cybersecurity awareness training, which is required under protection, and you need it, right? And that becomes not you trying to sell a product, that's you informing your client, hey, you need this capability because it's required for cyber insurance, as an example.
Yeah, I think the important thing is to think of yourself as a point man for these projects, so that you have a team under you that is thinking. Maybe it's not a full team. Maybe it's just you have a suite in front of you that is compliance focused. You have another suite that is vulnerability focused. and then you have another suite that is patching or remediation focused, and then you're coordinating across all three.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you do have context because you understand the client and where it's going, but the idea is that you want to be able to say, okay, now we can work with the client and we can prioritize based upon the compliance framework, based upon the vulnerability finding, and
Right.
what we can do easily as an IT shop. So you need to have that context across all three, which is where it's great to have these compliance as a service or threat
Right.
management as a service, where you can now see and be fed, here are the opportunities. Now let's talk to your client about them and how we can move forward.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it's not a big step from what managed service providers are doing today in managing the networks, to then graduate to compliance as a service. You just need the right tooling and training to get there. And once you can say, look, I can deliver NIST cybersecurity framework compliance as a service, you have now added a high value service to your clients. And by the way, it's all executive dashboards. So you're now able to say, hey, for your spend, we now have you within this compliance regime. And they'll, the ones in regulated industries will ask you off the bat, how do I provide HIPAA? Well, we actually have an answer for that, right? So you could now provide more or less the same services with additional tooling support at much higher margin. And that's why I think managed service providers are going to ultimately become compliance as a service providers, because that's where the high margin services are. That's where businesses are moving towards. It just level sets what needs to be done for everyone.
Yeah. And I think that's where you guys need to leave yourselves at is this level sets for everyone
Mm-hmm.
and puts you all on the same page. You don't, and look at this as an MSP. What are you missing? Why aren't you moving forward with security services? If you had a suite like this, like ThreatMate, like compliance scorecard, and you had a way to show your clients, this is the value, this is what needs to be done. And by the way, the bright lines are moving. Mid-sized businesses, small businesses are going to be under the compliance lens here very shortly.
Absolutely.
As we start cranking down on cyber warfare in the US and globally. So get ahead of the curve, build your suite out, find a threat management tool like ThreatMate, find a compliance as a service like compliance scorecard, find ones that fit in, and then find a way to display this and show this to your clients that is meaningful to them so you can make decisions quickly and effectively, not just shotgun approaching everything.
Exactly. You got it.
It's a crazy world out there, and I'm really glad that companies like you are stepping up and helping out MSPs, helping out small businesses to understand what the landscape looks like and making it approachable so that they can make good decisions for their future. Thank you, Anup, for coming on, and I hope to have you on again. And great luck in the pitch competition.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And, good luck to all the other pitch it contestants, because I'm aiming for the prize.
All right, we'll see you there.
All right.